So we're going to run this a little bit differently. The next portion is on DME. Instead of me standing up here and pontificating for an hour, we thought a couple of months ago that it would be good to have a kind of a panel discussion. So we're going to do that. I'm going to have Lynn LaRussa, the CAC rep from Georgia, who's been involved in helping APMA with some, and having had his own DME experiences, introduce our next speaker. We'll go over we're going to take our agenda. Basically, it's a very informal presentation. We do invite lots of questions. We have about 12 to 14 topics to go over. Some are going to be rather quick. Some will be rather lengthy, and we welcome your participation. Thanks.
All righty, folks. As we move on, I'd like to introduce Michael Hanna. He is the Provider Relations Senior Analyst for CGS Administrators, the DMEMAC for Jurisdiction C. Yay, that's us. Michael is the community coach for Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Louisiana, and Mississippi. He's the lead of the DMEMAC CERT Outreach and Education Task Force and a member of the following: AB DMEMAC Collaborative Work Group, DME Medical Review CERT Group, MLN National Provider Education Work Group. Michael has been with CGS for 11 years. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Missouri. For this session, Paul, Michael, and I are going to go over the questions and comments that you all had previously provided to APMA. So I want to thank and welcome Mike Hanna.
Okay, so if we could have the agenda put up on the computer, is there some way we can do that? Scott? We need the agenda. So I'm gonna just start off with some quick stuff that we've accomplished in the last year, and we'll have Michael kind of fill in the gaps. So one of the issues I brought up last year, the DME agenda. One of the things we had brought up last year was the whole issue of accreditation for podiatrists for custom fabricated items. You all know that the off-the-shelf stuff was sort of tossed out a number of years ago. But there was a long-lasting policy at CMS, and there you go. And that, fortunately, a couple months ago, we got official notice after the APMA meeting and after APMA went to CMS and told them that, well, hey, we can't give you an official word yet, but the official word was already made at that point, that that policy was also scrapped. So that's one piece of good news. The second piece of news that stems from the APMA meeting, and back in July of this past year, we had an issue where manufacturers were being told that the mill devices, direct mill devices, were no longer going to be recognized as custom devices under A5513. The quality standards was identified as the document that probably was the problem, and I have good news to report that as of this week, CMS has come out with a proposed revision to the quality standards, which should allow mill devices from scans or casts that are then made into digital images and then direct milled. They should be fine. The question we still have, and I got a communication from Dr. Hughes at the PDAC this week, where what are manufacturers still going to have to go through the validation process? We just don't know that yet. And Michael and I have had some emails back and forth about this. So those are some of the quick things that I just wanted to give you a quick report on. The first thing I want to discuss with Michael now is providing guidelines for documenting AFO replacement due to equipment loss, wear patterns, or change in prescriptions. Again, that's some of the questions that I've heard from some of my clients, my colleagues, and that you guys all posed here. So, Michael, go ahead. If you want to take the podium, you can.
No, that's fine. You can keep the podium. Is this on? Can y'all hear me? Okay. From a pure wear pattern standpoint, Medicare historically does not pay for wear and tear. Now, that being said, there are different reasonable useful lifetimes for different types of orthotics. They're going to be outlined in the policy article for the AFOs and KAFOs. Some of those are 1 year, some 2, some 3. So keep that in mind as well. Now for replacement due to loss, for those of you in the southern part of the country, you're very aware that this is a very big hurricane season. And just when we felt like we got through the hurricane season, the wildfires hit Napa Valley area. So CMS came through fairly quickly and offered waivers to allow you to use the CR modifier, which means you can replace that item and just append the CR modifier, provide brand new equipment. From an overall reference standpoint, both CGS and Noridian have information about these natural disasters on the homepage of our websites. And then for jurisdiction B and C, our supplier manual, chapter 5, section 9, talks about repairs, maintenance, and replacement. If an item is lost due to a specific event, then we will definitely consider replacement.
So, Michael, a very common occurrence for us as podiatrists is we give a patient a cam walker 3 years ago after an injury. And now their anatomy's changed, or the patient threw out the device, and it's supposed to be a 5-year useful lifetime on these things. How do you go, again, I think this kind of fits into the same formula here. It's a replacement it comes under the replacement of an AFO. So how would you suggest, under those sort of circumstances, that someone document it so that they can be reimbursed for that kind of service?
We would need to know, first of all, if it was a specific incident that caused the need for it to replace.
So a patient threw it out.
That would be a valid reason. That was one specific incident. They decided they were done with it. The other example you mentioned was anatomical changes. Change in weight, etc., is a change in medical condition, and we would definitely consider coverage for another. You use the term, the cam walker,
right.
Example. Yeah, we would take a look at that again.
So under those circumstances, other than the KX and RT and or LT modifier, is there a specific modifier that you would amend to the claim?
Unfortunately, there's not. You could add something to the claim narrative, the NTE segment, but what's likely going to happen is it's going to deny based on same or similar edits in the system, and you have to take that to redeterminations. But just explain the issue with redeterminations, provide supporting documentation, and allow the analyst to take a look at it.
Does everybody here know what same and similar means? Raise your hands if you don't know what it means. Okay, so same and similar, it's sort of like if the patient has had a device that is identical or similar. So they had a pneumatic cam walker, now you want to give them a non-pneumatic cam walker. They had one type of AFO, now you're going to give them another. That's same or similar. Or shoe. They had a shoe under the diabetic therapeutic shoe program. You want to check to see if they've had one. That would be within a calendar year. So that's what I mean by same and similar. All right, next question or statement, in fact, says that it seems that the documentation seems burdensome and redundant. Now, I don't know whether the poser of this question was referring to therapeutic shoes or AFOs, but you can give us a general, I guess, remark, and we'll kind of get into therapeutic shoes a little bit.
Dr. Robert Hoover is the medical director for Jurisdiction C, and he said, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And from an education standpoint, we pretty much follow that in provider outreach and education. Anytime a claim is audited by an entity, that reviewer doesn't have the luxury of a multi-year relationship with that patient like you might have. All they see is the document submitted for that particular claim. So while it might seem cumbersome and redundant, to paraphrase that question or to recite the question, it's going to be necessary in an audit situation to assure that the information is there for the reviewer to make an informed decision based on LCD requirements.
Okay. The next question, and I've been hounded by a bunch of you guys here this weekend about this. It's concerned with the PA or a nurse practitioner not being able to sign a certification form, perform a physical examination to attest to the patient's diabetes care. And we have a lot of folks that are practicing in rural areas. The person who posed this question is from a rural area in North Carolina, but we've got this from all over the country, where, you know, in rural spots. So is there anything on the horizon? I mean, we can talk a little bit about something that is out there right now. There is a House resolution. I'm not sure whether the PA Society or the Nurse Practitioner Society put out there. It is in your pamphlet. And basically, it is a resolution to replace physician with PA or nurse practitioner. So that, I think, it's good and it's bad in the sense that you can have the PA do the examination, you can have the PA sign the certification statement. Where I think where there's an unintended consequence to this whole thing is that the PA or the NP now is put in a position where they're going to be co-signing your note. And to have a physician extender do that for a physician, and the physician, again, who's treating the diabetes, the physician or the prescriber, rather, that's prescribing the therapeutic shoes could be an orthopedic surgeon, could be a vascular surgeon. I don't think those folks are going to be too happy about a PA or an NP signing off on their note either. So, Michael, why don't you kind of elaborate on this question a little bit, and let's hear what you have to say.
I need to back up just a little bit first. The diabetic shoe benefit is not part of the regular DME benefit. It's not part of the prosthetic benefit. It's actually a carve-out benefit. It comes from S12, or subsection S12 from 1861, the Social Security Act, and as such, the DMEMACs must go by how that portion of the act is written. And that portion of the act says that the certifying physician must be an MD or DO. If I had $1 for every time I'd been asked, yeah, but, or I know what you said, but why can't, or what if, or why come, then I'd be dialing in from the Bahamas today, not in person. Unfortunately, we have to follow the way the act is written. I get asked every time I conduct any education on diabetic shoes about the possibility of nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, or clinical nurse specialists being allowed to become certifying physicians. At present, that's not possible. Dr. Kesselman mentioned the House resolution bill. I'm aware of that. The website that I looked at when it came out this spring said it had approximately 1% chance of passing. So I wasn't holding my breath. But this is one of those situations where, you know, we jokingly say, will it take an act of Congress to change it? It actually will take an act of Congress to change it because this comes from the act. I understand the access to care issues that are involved for many patients in rural areas. Maybe they have an MD that comes to their town twice a month. Other than that, they use nurse practitioners. Unfortunately, from a diabetic shoe aspect, they must have that certifying visit with an MD or DO only. So that's where we are at this point in time. Did you have a follow-up, ma'am? I saw a hand come up.
Paul mentioned orthopedic surgeon, but orthopedic surgeon doesn't need anybody to.
Yeah, they're not treating the diabetes.
Well, I think he stated any MD or DO should do it, even though they might not be treating diabetes.
No, that's Michael. You want to answer that?
The policy article is where the coverage criteria is found, and it states MD or DO.
Okay,
So,
but then does it further state they have to be treating their diabetes?
it does. That medical professional must be treating the beneficiary's systemic diabetic condition.
So in other words, an orthopedic surgeon who signs off on a diabetic or diabetic shoes is wrong if he's not the one that's prescribing the insulin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the certifying physician cannot be the supplier except in circumstances under which you're in a health professional shortage area.
No, I said he doesn't have to be the supplier. I'm saying that the
that would be invalid in case of an audit because we have to have that encounter from the certifying physician that talks about their systemic diabetic condition.
And that's why the House resolution I talked about is problematic, because you can't have a physician extender being put in a position, nor would I think they even thought this through, to be put in a position where they're going to countersign a physician's note. In the case it would be ours, but it could just as well be the orthopedic surgeon who's managing the foot problem, or the plastic surgeon, or the vascular surgeon. You understand what I'm saying? So this is, I mean, I think that marrying this resolution with the HELP Act might be a way to go. Yes, Paul? This is the other PK.
Thank you. Just to extend on that, can the managing physician of the physician extender sign that medical record from the physician extender?
No.
No.
That medical professional is unable to do so.
He can't countersign it, and it will not qualify.
He or she needs to conduct that encounter exam regarding the systemic diabetic condition.
That's why.
That's a very good question.
Right. That's what Paul and I were talking about this before, and they want the medical professional, the medical doctor who's treating the diabetes to actually conduct the exam. And that's why they can't have their PA sign your note either, the way it's currently written. Am I correct?
Correct.
So we have that
Well,
point.
before we move
Yes.
on, I'd like
No,
to make one more point,
Just
Dr.
within
Kessler.
this, but go ahead, sure.
I want to make sure everyone is aware that you, the podiatrist, can conduct the foot exam. Send that exam to the certifying physician. He or she will indicate agreement, sign, and date it if they don't conduct the foot exam. There's been a lot of, I would say, misinformation or miscommunication in the industry the last couple of years about that, and I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page here. If that certifying physician doesn't do the foot exam, it can be conducted by a DPM, an NP, a PA, and then that document is sent to the certifying physician who will indicate agreement, sign, and date it.
But let's take that one more step.
Okay.
Okay, so I send my note to the physician, he countersigns it, but what about the note that I'm getting from the physician's office saying, yes, the patient's a diabetic, yes, they need therapeutic shoes and insoles and all of that? That too has to be signed only by the MD or DO, or can that be signed by the...
Only by the MD or DO.
Yes, I understand all that. Okay, so both pieces have, both the note that they're countersigning from me and the note they're sending from their visit have to be the MD or DO's note.
Yes, and the other important issue, and Michael will elaborate on this a bit, is that the certification statement can't predate the note for the examination and supervision of the diabetes care. You can't establish medical necessity for something without an exam. So they can be contemporaneous, they could be on the same day, but if you have a certification statement that's signed, let's say, June 1st, and the examination didn't take place until June 15th, that's not going to work. And you've seen cases like that, have you not?
I've been cussed out for cases like that. Like,
Yeah, Josh.
can't help it.
The AFO-LCD has specific justifications for the use of a custom versus a prefabricated AFO, but a similar differentiated justification does not exist in the shoe description, differentiating the justification for custom versus prefab diabetic inserts. So could you give some guidance in terms of appropriate documentation or even the need for that? Because, there are, in practices, there are many practices fitting all of their patients with custom diabetic inserts, and so I wonder what type of, support that might need or how inappropriate that might be considered.
Well, I would say for those practices that are only doing the 5513, it's highly possible that an auditing entity would review that and then reach out to that particular practice. Data analysis takes place every day in the auditing world, and I could see the ZPICs look at that and find it interesting that ABC Podiatry only does 5513s. Now, from an overall standpoint, your medical record will be the basis on the 12 versus the 13.
Just as another point of clarification, Michael has been very instrumental in helping me, Lenny, and several other podiatrists. We just actually, Dave Freedman offered up an issue that he had, and I'm sure, Dave, you want to share the story with everyone, or would you like me to do it? So Dave had an educational meeting with some folks from Noridian. It was him that made me contact you, and they told him that that the MD or DO treating the diabetes they were going to abide by a more conservative approach to the interpretation of the policy, and they felt that it was for the MD or DO treating the diabetes who had to do the foot examination. And Dave reached out to me. I said, absolutely, that's incorrect. What's, I think, kind of spooked Dave and I both was that one of the people from the Noridian was an attorney who told him this. So I reached out to Michael, and Michael was gracious enough to reach out to his folks at CGS, who I think reached out to the folks at Noridian that were at Dave's office, and we kind of nipped that in the bud very quietly I think it was within the last month, was it not? So he's been a great resource to us.
Actually, there are two reps, provider outreach reps, my counterparts at Noridian, that I work with fairly frequently in the O&P and the diabetic shoe world, and I reached out to both of them and received a vehement, no, that's wrong. So let's just say there's probably some recalibration training for those individuals.
So that brings up another question, and that is when someone becomes an auditor for anything within Medicare, especially within the DME world, are they auditing everything that gets audited? Are they specially trained? How close are they supervised? When are they let out on their own? And how often are they monitored by supervisory personnel? I know that's a lot, but...
Well, I can't speak for other auditing entities, but from a CGS perspective, anyone that audits medical records is an RN at a minimum. That individual is going to be trained on that particular LCD. Let's use diabetics as an example. They will be trained on the LCD, the policy article, the documentation requirements. They will then review examples, and once they are set out on their own, then we actually have in-house clinicians that review them. So their work is reviewed, and then from the other side of the coin, suppliers will reach out to me and say, hey, Michael, can you look at this claim? It denied, and I don't see why. I can look at the documentation, and if I agree with the supplier, I can reach out to a liaison of medical review and ask them for their opinion. So, you know, if that clinician made an error, then if it's a trend that we're seeing, then there will be recalibration training for that individual. And if it's a one-off just because they missed something, either way, we will take care of the claim for you.
When discussing the difference between the 5512 and the 5513, the practices that do a lot of the custom, when it comes to the documentation, what kind of documentation would you need for it to not be allowed to do the custom compared to the prefabricated?
Well, keep in mind, when I answer, I'm answering in general terms. I'm not a clinician. I just play one on television. So I want to make sure everyone's aware of that fact. It's really going to be based on that individual patient and why the podiatrist feels that the custom 5513 meets their needs versus the 5512.
Well, in order to get coverage, they have to qualify. We know all the different ones you have. Well, I mean, if you have those criteria, why would they not qualify for the 5513 every time? I mean, see what I'm saying? I mean, just trying, because I do a lot of the custom, and I'm thinking, what am I missing here that I could get?
What is in your record to reflect that the A5512 is inadequate?
I'm sorry, say it again?
What in your record reflects that the A5512 would not be adequate? That's the answer to your question.
So I'll just throw up some examples that I use. One would be that we had tried an A55-112 device on the patient, and it failed to adequately address their symptoms. Another would be that the patient has multiple hyperkeratosis, multiple deformities, multiples of something that would just make an off-the-shelf device inappropriate. As Lenny said, there is no specific medical criteria that precludes you from doing an A5513, but then again, you got to have some, as Michael has offered up, that some clinician up the food chain is going to be making some decisions. So you've got to give some sort of documentation as to why you feel it's appropriate, not that you're just doing it because it's a benefit. There's got to be some medical need for it. The same thing would be true for a custom molded shoe, because it just says, you have to provide medical documentation to support it. It's gray, and actually I prefer gray over black and white, because now you just have to offer up some reason, some rationale, and think about someone else, one of your colleagues reviewing that. Would they agree with you, or would they disagree with you?
Qualifying factors should put you in that category where it shouldn't.
But again, for this specific differentiation, there is no specific criteria. Just like there is no specific criteria for a non-pneumatic walker versus a pneumatic walker. There's a whole multitude of factors you can put in to support that need, but it's not specifically mentioned in the policy.
It just depends on the auditor.
Well, I guess it could. Yeah, Sharon.
I mean, if you look at the AFO LCD and you look at what they require for custom versus off-the-shelf, I mean, ordinarily you're going to try an off-the-shelf device first, and if that fails, then you can justify going to custom. Correct me if I'm wrong.
For the most part, yeah.
So there are exceptions to that where
Right.
you can go straight to custom, but you've got to protect yourself with some kind of documentation that would outline why the off-the-shelf device is not appropriate.
Yes, Sharon.
Could you please explain to me and Blue why, when we are required to have a certificate of medical necessity signed by the physician treating the diabetes, agreeing with our findings right there on the certificate of medical necessity, why is it necessary to have the physician write another note or agree with our findings, another piece of paper in the chain?
What do you mean by certificate of medical necessity?
The certifying statement.
Oh, the certifying statement?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I ask is because I know that the term CMN is bannered frequently in the industry. Well, across the entire DME POS spectrum, there's only a few categories of equipment that actually require real CMN. So, just signing that statement is, in essence, a result of a medical record. Just like the order for shoes is a result of your medical record.
Is it a summary of our medical records?
No, it's a result. So anytime a claim is audited for review, if it's a comprehensive medical audit, we want to see the medical records where that summary or that synopsis came from. And in this case, it's going to be the MD or DO's systemic diabetic encounter visit. It's going to be your foot examination that outlines what problems that beneficiary has with their feet. Then we'll also ask for, when CGS was auditing shoes, we're not currently auditing shoes right now. When we were auditing them through 2016, we also asked for documentation regarding delivery. We wanted to see the orders if it wasn't conducted by, if they went to a supplier, like a regular DME supplier versus a podiatrist's office, if they farmed it out or whatever the case might be. We wanted to see the exam where the beneficiary was fitted for the shoes. At delivery, we wanted to see the documentation where we made sure that the shoes fit appropriately, and it's something more than shoes fit good or they look pretty. That's what we were looking for when we audited. One thing from a DMEMAC perspective, when we begin an audit on anything, we let you know ahead of time. We provide a listserv, usually 4 to 6 weeks before we begin auditing. When I say we, I mean our medical review department. We let you know what documents we're going to ask for. As provider outreach team, then we work closely with medical review, so I'll make sure I schedule a webinar regarding that particular equipment category within the month prior to or the month that those audits begin, so people have an avenue to ask those questions. Now, audits, as you know, and from a prepay standpoint for the DMEMACs, are going away. There's a new auditing program in place. So I don't know if Noridian has been auditing diabetic shoes in 2017 or not, have they? So you should see fewer and fewer of those ADR letters.
It's an additional documentation request letter, one of those prepayment audit letters that you love to get.
I spoke at the Alabama Durable Medical Equipment Association last week, and 4 or 5 providers were afraid to tell me that they quit getting ADR letters on PAPs and oxygen because they're afraid I'd turn them in. Then I got up to the podium and started talking about the new audit process, and they're like, oh, well, never mind then, I'm good.
Yeah, so you, again, in your handout, when I talked, there's a separate handout about the 855.13 stuff. There is something within that talks about the new targeted probe audit type policy where it's going to be more educational, as opposed to them throwing out a wide screen of random audits. They're now going to be targeting individuals who they suspect are not following the rules and going in and doing education. Personally, I think it's a much better way to spend your resources, because you guys do have limited resources. What do you
Right.
think?
I mean, we have a finite clinician population. The widespread audits, like you mentioned, Dr. Kesselman, you know, maybe we would stop every 10th claim that came in the door for A5500. Well, all we know is that of the number of claims on average per day, that was the number of claims that our clinician workload could handle. With the targeted probe and educate audit scenarios coming out, we are going to be looking at data analysis. We're going to compare claim analysis. We're going to look at cert data analysis and then reach out to those specific suppliers. And the goal is what process improvement can be made from us looking at just a very brief number, usually between 20 to 40 claims, work with you to look at our results. If you need to process changes, give you time to do so, and then we'll do another round of that with education following. And the goal is after 1 or 2 rounds, we're done. I participated in a call a week ago, the very first one, I think it was for Jurisdiction C, and looking at 35 claims, the reviewer found issues with 3. And 2 of the 3 was a technical error where the delivery date was incorrect. So instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to look at 35 more, talk to your intake staff about delivery, we just let them know and reminded them what the delivery date should be, and we took them off the list for a year because it was a very minor technical issue. It wasn't a widespread medical necessity problem.
Now, is there a possibility that I know Dave did it in his office, that you could actually contact your DMEMAC and request an educational in-service, either be on a phone or in person from an auditor?
Not necessarily.
Or education review people?
From a provider outreach and analysis perspective, yes. You can definitely reach out to either CGS, and I've got contact information for my counterparts at Noridian for O&P and diabetic shoes, and we can set up a one-on-one webinar with you and your staff. I've done that. I've also tried to take the approach of, this. If you feel this has worked well and you're having issues, I did one with Mississippi a couple months ago, and the podiatrist was having a lot of problems with nurse practitioners. nurse practitioners, excuse me, get my information to them and see if they would like for me to come down and speak at an event or something, so we can all be on the same page.
Josh?
I'm a member of the
Hold on.
DME AB collaboration work group. We conducted national webinars on diabetic shoes this summer. We had almost 600 suppliers and providers. When I say providers, I mean your MDs and DO staff on our webinar. Noridian did one that same day in the afternoon, and they had, I think, about 300 and some folks. So we were able to educate almost 1,000 people just to get everyone on the same page of what the policy says. And we're continuing to do that with other LCDs as well. So just want to make sure you guys are aware of that too. Sorry.
It's okay. Josh, you got a question?
A couple of other issues that I found that there's a lack of understanding and confusion. One having to do with enrollment and the need for multi-practice location or multi-dispensing practice location having separate enrollments and not doing it all through a single location. And the second being that the supplier requirement being that there be some type of mechanism for follow-up patient satisfaction survey. Many podiatrist is not being required to have facility accreditation, but still needing to be compliant with the requirements, I think are not aware of that, nor if they are, how extensive that follow-up needs to be in order to be so. So if you could address how that might be best accomplished.
Unfortunately, both of your questions revolve around the National Supplier Clearinghouse. And I would not be able to provide a full answer. I can tell you how to reach out to them. Go to Chapter 2 of the Supplier Manual from the CGS website, either Jurisdiction Bravo or Jurisdiction Charlie. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, I can get you the name of the National Ombudsman for the NSC. He would be a really good contact.
We actually had Erica Williams, who was the ombudsman she was terrific. She was here a few years ago. And unfortunately, the person that took over for her has left. So any pointing direction for somebody who's taken over for them would be wonderful.
I've worked with a few times with the new ombudsman. He seems pretty knowledgeable from the questions I've had for him. We've worked together at a few trade show events, so I can definitely give you his contact information. He's been really good about following up when my suppliers have had questions for him.
Yeah, John.
Just two things. One on the diabetic insert policy we're talking about. Just last night, from WPS, in their Listserv email, there was a notice that there is a request for comments, a period that's going on from now until December 11
Yes.
on this. Do you suggest that we should be putting in comments on individual basis or coming up with statewide comments, or what would you suggest?
Okay, so
I'm surprised it came from
right.
WPS and not from CGS.
Right. Well, let me kind of elaborate on this whole thing and back up to what we originally started talking about. Back in July of 2017, the PDAC came out with a declaration that basically said that custom-milled devices would not be allowed and that every manufacturer had to submit their devices for reapproval, and they had to be done in such a manner that a physical positive would have to be made. Now, for those of you who are very involved in orthotic fabrication, you know that most national labs today are no longer making physical positives. If you're not scanning, they'll take your negative image, whether it's a biofoam or a plaster or an STS type sock, and they're going to scan it and make a digital image out of it, and then they're going to direct mill your device. This is regardless of whether it's an 85513 or an L3000, whatever. So, and there's variable reasons why this happened. I don't want to get into the specific particulars in that because my blood pressure is going to go up. Anyway, so And Josh and I had been talking about the quality standards for quite some time, and it turns out that we think that this whole thing goes back to the quality standards, which was written, eons ago, and every year it's kind of just readapted and readapted and readapted. And despite the fact that this lowly podiatrist here wrote a note to the quality standards people when it first came out, 10 some odd years ago, saying that they didn't address this, why didn't you address it? It just kind of left fallow, just laid there until recently. So this past Friday, a week ago today, CMS came out with a new adaptation of the quality standards, which does in fact allow for custom-milled devices. And they announced in this publication, and you have a copy of this in your handout, which I'm going to give you a little bit more information about in a sec, that there's going to be an open door forum. And it was not on the original posting, but there is now a phone number. So if you guys want to jot down a phone number, I'm going to give it to you. It's 800-837-1935. I'll repeat that. It's 800-837-1935. And the conference number, I believe, is 657-3429. Is that right, Michael?
That is correct.
Okay. So they're having an open door forum. I think it's going to be 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday. At
November
2 o'clock.
28th, 2 p.m. Eastern
Time, okay? Now, so they're supposedly going to have experts. I don't know who these experts are. I did call CMS. I did call the office that actually disseminated this and spoke to one of the deputy administrators about this and basically asked a very simple question. If you guys knew that this was the problem back in May and June and July, why did you let the PDAC go ahead and issue this proclamation? Why didn't that basically caused a lot of alarm to a lot of our members, a lot of the manufacturers. Why didn't you just sort of say, hey, PDAC, like kind of lay low, we're going to deal with this, and so forth. And I didn't get an answer that Michael would give me. Michael gives me a direct answer. I got a bureaucratic answer, which I really, quite frankly, don't want to waste your time with. So we, APMA and AOPA, are going to be having a conference call this Monday. I think it's at, Scott, is it at 1 or 2 o'clock on Monday? Do you know, with AOPA? We're actually having a conference call. I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, it's next week. And we're going to hammer all these issues out. I've identified a couple of little maybe weak spots in here in the new proposed quality standards. It may just be an oversight. It may be my paranoia about it. As far as individual podiatrists, suppliers writing, I would kind of hold off on doing that based on what our call is with AOPA. That's the American Orthotics and Prosthetics Association, for those of you who don't know. Well, what happened actually in July was AOPA and APMA and PFA and several other organizations wrote a letter to CMS via Congress, and we sort of that's how all this sort of came about. I don't know, in terms of individuals writing letters right now, I think I would kind of hold off. My firm belief is that CMS would not have put these changes in red print in the quality standards and actually placed them into the quality standards if they weren't going to actually adapt them. I mean, it just seems kind of foolish for them to do that. And then, yes, the comment period ends December 11th, with the new quality standards having to go into effect January 1st. And again, my question to the CMS administrator was, that's a really tight time frame considering the holidays in there. Anybody who's tried to talk with any of the HCPICS common work group people at that period of time, it's impossible to get a hold of anybody on the phone. So I would say for right now, I'm going to say hold off on sending in individual comments, and it's probably just the contractors exercising their statutory requirements to announce all this stuff.
Gotcha.
But I would hold off for now.
So, a different issue just came up in our office within the last couple of weeks. We had a patient with posterior tibial tendon dysfunction, a woman who was about 82. We had her in a cam walker, and it wasn't working. So we really wanted to get her into an Arizona brace. Ask her, have you had any bracing before? No. Prescription was given to her, it was filled by an outside orthotist. Device was constructed, dispensed to her, patient got billed. EOB saying the patient already had a brace, and our argument was, but it was an off-the-shelf brace, and it was a different code altogether, nothing that was custom. So the woman is quite disturbed, and I don't quite know how to answer her, except don't worry about it yet, we'll see how this is figured out, because it didn't seem it would be appropriate. Does this make sense to you?
It does. It probably hit some same or similar edits and denied as such. So you're going to have to follow the appeals process, which is perfectly fine if there's been a change in condition. May I ask what jurisdiction you bill? CGS. Is that, what state are you? Okay. If you want to reach out to me, I can give you my card and with the appropriate pro rep if necessary, but you would definitely follow up with the appeals process on that one. You know, I'm sure you're all aware of those late night commercials about does your back hurt, does your knee hurt? Maybe it came from something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of times, you say so it was an outside orthotist that billed for it. It's really their problem. They're the billing entity. You're obviously as the prescriber, there's little you can do, but they could have done their due diligence and said, hey, you know, we did the same and similar. This is here. It's something that they should be familiar with appealing. And basically saying, listen, the patient now has an anatomical issue. They failed more conservative therapy with an off-the-shelf device. And I would think if they have appropriate documentation, it should be successfully appealed. Yes, PK.
Okay, just another quick question about the 30 Medicare supplier standards. One of them says you can't have two providers in the same office. Is that based upon TAN or NPI? If we're in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 podiatrists practicing at the same location, obviously we have different MPIs, but we have the same TIN, can each one of us be a Medicare supplier?
That's an NSA question.
All right, I can kind of answer that. Physicians are exempt from most of those types of enrollment issues, such as a limit on the hours, the square footage space. As a group, the billing is being done by the group, Paul, or is it being? It's being done by the group. The rendering provider is the one who's dispensing, so I don't think that's an issue at all. And in fact, there are multi-specialty doctors who are different groups that sublease from others, and that, again, physicians are not subject to those sorts of problems.
I have a question.
Yeah, Lenny.
If you guys deem that it is potentially valuable for us to submit comments regarding the issue that you were just discussing after your meeting on Monday, using our listserv would be an excellent opportunity for you to disseminate that information so that we can all get on the horn and submit our comments.
Well, I think what we're going to do is once we've spoken with AOPA and see kind of what they're going to do, and we'll see how the open door forum goes. And I think at that point, APMA will probably submit a comment letter in conjunction with AOPA or separately. And then certainly I think that would be an excellent idea to, disseminate the letter through the CAC listserv, and then, ask people to add any further comments on their own. Why are there so many audits even when the rules are followed? This is sort of like kind of a very general but vague question, but I think it hits to the heart of a lot of things we're discussing.
How am I going to answer this? The CERT data kind of drives overall audits, and from an CERT denial perspective, the DME is about, well, in 2010 we were at 80% error rate overall. That's pretty bad. We got down to the mid 40s in 2015, And it looks like that's going to go up just a little bit for 2016 data because of ACA date stamp on face-to-face encounter issues. So that plays a significant role. When the CERT provides their results back to CMS, it's a snowball effect. This CMS tells other contractors, like, this is too high, work on it. There were some changes made beginning in 2017 from a DMEMAC perspective. That's when CGS quit doing any audits on diabetic shoes. So we took that one off our strategy, if you will. I don't know what Dr. Hoover or Dr. Brennan's strategy is for 2018, but with the onboarding of TPE, the Targeted Probe and Education, I don't know if shoes will be a part of that or not. It's really going to depend on their overall strategy, and I haven't heard what they plan to audit.
Well, what do you, like, for example, with the balance braces on AFOs, are there specific parameters, not having looked at the chart, are there certain specific things that you're looking for other than, increased utilization on a one-by-one basis? Are you looking at bilateral utilization? Are you comparing one supplier group against another? I mean, what is there any specific thing that you're looking at?
From a spinal and knee orthosis standpoint, the ZPICs have become much more involved this year, and I think that's probably due to those late-night commercials. So I've gotten a lot more emails from suppliers saying, well, the ZPICs got me on a 100% prepay audit. And then talking to my counterparts at the ZPICs, we find that it was a telehealth visit from a doctor in Alaska, and the patient lives in South Florida, and went, well, you're South Florida, wonder why the ZPIC's involved. So from a DMEMAC perspective, we're not doing a lot. We started some L codes, but those actually the group 3 or activity level K3 microprocessor needs from a prosthetic standpoint, but we're not doing a lot on O&P industry overall. The CERT contractor, from a jurisdiction C standpoint, because I watch that data pretty closely, it's kind of an ebb and flow with them. The CERT contractor course is everything's at random on a post-based standpoint, but sometimes they will choose more claims than others based on what they want to review. They were hitting the O&P industry really heavy for jurisdiction C at the beginning of 2016, and then that kind of ebbed off at the end of the year, and it looks like they've started to pick it back up a little bit for some bracing, but not necessarily AFO, KFO. I've noticed an increase in spinal claims as of late, as well as lower limb prosthesis.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Yeah, Lenny.
3, 2 yes or no will suffice. Is Region C going to lose Dr. Hoover? I think you mentioned the second director's name.
Oh, no. Every DMEMAC has an associate medical director. Dr. Robert Hoover is the medical director for jurisdiction C. He's been with us for years. From a purely personal standpoint, I think we're very lucky to have him. He's knowledgeable. He will always provide you a straight answer, whether he has to put on his bureaucratic hat or his clinician hat. If I'm speaking in an event like this and I've got a clinical question, he's been kind enough to provide his cell number. All I've got to do is text him. So he works very closely with provider outreach and education. So I hope we don't lose him, because that would really suck.
Is it ever possible for a patient to receive therapeutic shoes as a covered service via mail?
I've seen it or heard about it happening. I've never seen actual documentation of that occurring, simply because how do you get around the fitting when you dismiss the shoes?
Right. So what Lenny's referring to and Michael's answering is that there are several methods of delivery. And I think for the most part, for the things that we do, other than maybe, surgical supplies for wound care, most of the things that we do would require a face-to-face dispensing event. So, yeah, Frank.
I have a general question. If you're an investor in a company that makes any DME product, is there a violation if you provide that DME product to a patient? In other words, if you're a partial investor, you have limited investment in the company, and that company produces a DME product, and you, as a medical necessity, patient requires this particular DME product, and you dispense it to them. Is there any issue about violation of federal law or anything else?
That would be a really good question for an attorney that knowledgeable in healthcare.
That's an anti-kickback. It's actually not even a Stark issue. That's an anti-kickback issue. I can only tell you as someone who does a fair amount of consulting and very limited in practice. You do have to be. You got to be very, very careful. If your contract or your relationship with the company you're talking about has any tie-in to sales within your office for your own patients, that's definitely an inducement violation, and I can, cite you a whole bunch of things. So you got to make sure that that's. But in terms of preclusion, you just have to be careful that you dot every I and cross every T. And I agree with Michael. You need to speak to an attorney and make sure things are done absolutely correct. Because the anti-kickback stuff is even for stuff that Medicare doesn't cover. So I'm really glad you brought this up because how many people here are PICA policyholders? Okay, so you should have just received something that I wrote via email about PAL's closure. And there was stuff on PM News about getting a free scanner and free this and free that. And even though this stuff is not, I checked this out with Kevin West. Kevin and I had several conversations about this over the last couple of weeks. Even if the service like foot orthotics is not covered by Medicare, if you are found to have received an inducement, and certainly to me, a free scanner is an inducement to do services with a lab, it doesn't matter whether or not that service was covered by Medicare or not. You're in violation of the anti-kickback scheme, and you are going to get kicked at pretty hard. So, that's something you definitely want to make sure what you're doing doesn't violate any of that, and it's way beyond my ability to answer that. Get yourself a good healthcare attorney and have them explore your specific circumstance. I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay, going back to the shoes by mail order, and you talk about the fitting, the actual fitting of shoes. Are there any guidelines as to who actually has to be involved in the personal fitting of shoes, whether it can be an assistant in the office or whether it has to be the ordering physician or anyone else?
Answering from a DME perspective, when we were conducting audits on shoes, our clinicians didn't necessarily look for the title of that individual. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be the DPM doing it, but to be someone that understands good fitting. We were looking for information at fitting that indicated it was simply more than the beneficiary telling us the shoes fit well. We looked for notes that showed how those shoes would alleviate any foot problems they might have, how those inserts would take care of those problems and issues.
So that would be a clinician, wouldn't it? To be able to determine that?
I can tell you that our RNs weren't looking for a clinician to do that.
I will tell you that you have two issues to consider here with that. One is your state law. Sharon comes from New Jersey. In New Jersey, there is a law, and I think there's about 17 or 18 other states that have this requirement as well. You need to be licensed to perform certain DME items, dispense certain DME items. So I think oxygen is probably one of those that's uniformly across the board. The second would be like therapeutic shoes or orthopedic shoes or AFOs in the state of New Jersey. you have to be licensed to do that. So your state scope of practice as a podiatrist in the state of New Jersey would take care of that. In Texas, there is an O&P licensure requirement. So basically, not your medical assistant in those states can't do it. But that's, again, that's a state requirement. I don't know that the DMEMACs are going to be able to have the ability to kind of enforce that. But the other thing that I would add here is we're dealing with the highest risk patients that we're dealing with. And I just think that, you know, having a medical assistant who's not a certified orthotic fitter or certified therapeutic shoe fitter doing this, it kind of leaves you open to, you know, a significant amount of actions, legal actions. And I will offer to you that the number one malpractice problem for orthotists and prosthetic individuals are therapeutic shoes and therapeutic shoe inserts, because they're dealing with the highest risk population. So why would you want to, you know, chuck this off to having a medical assistant do it? Certainly they can help the patient put the shoe on, but you're the person that should be coming in, assessing whether the shoe fits appropriately, and writing the note. Does that help? Yeah. Do we have time for 2 more questions, or are we done? Right.
Only they can, orthotists or someone who's qualified to work independently.
Correct.
Position, in one of those non-licensure states.
Thanks for that.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mike, next time.
Sharon, well, we'll take one more question.
Just as a quick follow-up.
Sure.
I am from New Jersey, where we are permitted to have others do a fitting. However, in New Jersey, we have a lot of pharmacists that are doing diabetic shoes. And just because a supplier can give them a piece of paper saying they are now certified to fit a pair of shoes does not make them qualified to dispense the pair of shoes and ascertain that they are fit.
I don't disagree with that. I agree with that. The problem is that the state law allows, if their license, if their other license allows for that, then the O&P regulation doesn't apply to them. That's an unfortunate loophole, but, you know, that's the way it is.
It just seems to me, and the people that I represent in New Jersey, that as professionals that are the most qualified to dispense the shoes, fit the shoes, that we are being looked at in a highly suspicious manner and subject to audits, when others perhaps should be the ones that are looked at.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.